It was 2 hours before midnight on October 11th, 1492. Christopher Columbus, standing on the deck of the Santa Maria, was desperately scanning the dark horizon for any sign of land. His crew was on the brink of mutiny, and the voyage was far longer than promised. Then he saw it. As recorded in his own ship's log, a light appeared in the distance, like a small wax candle rising and falling. He called for a gentleman of the king's court, Pedro Gutierrez, who also saw it. Moments later, it vanished. The next morning, they sighted the island of San Salvador. This was not a star, not a natural phenomenon. Columbus knew the heavens better than any man of his age. It was an unexplained light, behaving intelligently, signaling the eve of a new world's discovery. What did the great explorer truly witness on the edge of the unknown? This single account is not an anomaly. It is a fragment of a hidden record that spans every century of human civilization. Long before the term UFO was coined, before Roswell, before flying saucers captured the modern imagination, our ancestors were documenting encounters with objects and beings that defied all understanding. These are not just myths or fairy tales. They are entries in official logs, reports to kings, illustrations in scientific journals, and testimonies from soldiers, scholars, and saints. Tonight, we are not beginning our story in the 20th century. We are going back, thousands of years back, to confront the evidence that has been hiding in plain sight. We will examine 25 of the most meticulously documented cases of ancient aerial phenomena. We will see the art they inspired, read the words they provoked, and follow the trail of a mystery that has been with us since the dawn of recorded time. From the battlefields where glowing shields decided the fate of empires, to the medieval towns terrorized by celestial armadas, to the sacred texts that describe wheeled vehicles in the sky with the precision of an engineer, this is a journey through the forgotten history of the impossible. We will meet pharaohs who recorded circles of fire, Renaissance painters who encoded strange machines in their masterpieces, and World War II pilots stalked by intelligently controlled balls of light they called Foo Fighters. This video is an investigation into a pattern that conventional history cannot explain. It is a compilation of the moments when the familiar sky betrayed its secrets. The witnesses were not hysterical or uneducated. They were some of the most observant and credible figures of their eras. They wrote down what they saw, and they were baffled. We are left with their testimony, echoing across the centuries, asking us the same chilling question: if these things were happening then, what does that mean for us now? The story of UFOs does not belong to the age of television and telescopes. It is etched in stone, inscribed on papyrus, and painted on cathedral ceilings. This is the untold chronicle of humanity's oldest and most persistent mystery. This is the search for ancient UFOs. Before we continue, make sure to smash both the like and hype buttons and subscribe to our channel for more ominous history videos. We greatly appreciate your support. 10,000 BC, the prehistoric UFOs of cave paintings. Long before the written word, before the rise of Egypt or Sumer, our ancestors communicated their world through art on stone. In the deep, silent caves and sheltered rock faces across the world, they left behind a breathtaking gallery of their lives. Among the depictions of hunting scenes, spiritual beings, and local animals, there exist figures that strike the modern viewer as profoundly strange. These are not just abstract shapes, they are detailed, recurring images of entities with features that some researchers argue resemble helmets, antennae, and suits, and objects that look nothing like the natural world they knew. One of the most famous examples comes from the Kimberley region in northwestern Australia. Here, the indigenous Aboriginal people painted the Wandjina figures. These are majestic, haloed beings with large, dark eyes, often lacking a mouth, and skull-like heads surrounded by a radiant crest or helmet. The local tradition states clearly that the Wandjina were sky beings, creator spirits who came from the clouds and the stars. They brought law and culture to the people. Importantly, after their work was done, they did not die. They simply returned to the sky, their images painted to preserve their memory and power. To the modern eye, The description of beings from the sky with featureless faces and radiating helmets is immediately suggestive. Across the world, in the valley of Val Camonica in Italy, another set of puzzling images emerges. Among the hundreds of thousands of petroglyphs carved into the rock over millennia, there are figures known as the Communion Rose, or, more provocatively, the astronaut of Val Camonica. This particular figure, dated to around 7000 BC, shows a being with a distinctive helmet or halo, two large round eyes, and what appears to be a schematic of a body. It stands apart from the more common depictions of warriors and solar symbols. While archaeologists typically interpret it as a shaman or a deity, its stylized, almost technological appearance has fueled speculation that it represents something else entirely, something not of this earth. In the Sahara Desert, at the site of Tassili Naja in Algeria, rock art depicts what appear to be humanoid figures with round, featureless heads, sometimes shown floating or hovering. French explorer Henri Lotte, who documented these paintings in the 1950s, famously dubbed one large mural the Great Martian God due to its otherworldly appearance. These paintings, created in a region that was once a lush savanna, tell a story of a changing climate and a changing people. Yet amidst the giraffes and cattle, these strange, large-headed figures present an enduring enigma. Were they imaginative spirit forms, or could they have been attempts to record encounters with visitors whose form and technology were beyond Neolithic comprehension? The key to understanding these paintings lies in context. We must be careful not to impose our modern, technologically saturated perspective onto ancient artists. Their symbolic language was rich and complex, often representing spiritual concepts rather than literal events. However, the persistent global theme of sky beings bringing knowledge is difficult to dismiss. From the Wandjina to the figures of Tassili, the common threads are the celestial origin and the transformative impact on the people below. Whether these are purely mythological archetypes or fossilized memories of actual contact may be the ultimate unanswerable question. But they represent humanity's first recorded statements of the unknown in the heavens. A primal chapter in a very long story. 593 BC, Ezekiel's Wheel Bible UFO sighting. Within the sacred texts of the Abrahamic faiths lies a passage of such bizarre and mechanical detail that it has spawned centuries of theological debate, and in the modern era become a cornerstone of ancient astronaut theory. This is the vision of the prophet Ezekiel found in the Old Testament book that bears his name. Ezekiel, a priest living in exile in Babylon, describes an encounter by the Kibar River that begins with a stormy wind from the north and culminates in a vision of God's glory. But the vehicle of that glory, the Merkaba, or chariot throne, is described with an engineer's precision that sounds utterly alien to a pastoral Iron Age setting. The description in the first chapter of Ezekiel is worth examining closely. He sees a great cloud with flashing fire and brilliant light. From within, it emerge 4 living creatures with intersecting wings and faces of a man, lion, ox, and eagle. But the focus quickly shifts to their accompanying technology. Beside each creature was a wheel sparkling like topaz. The text famously says the appearance of the wheels was like a wheel within a wheel. As they moved, they could go in any of 4 directions without turning. Their rims were high and awesome and full of eyes all around. Above the heads of the creatures was a vault like crystal, and above that, a throne of sapphire, upon which sat a human-like form surrounded by radiance. The interpretation of this vision is a layered endeavor. For 2 millennia, Jewish and Christian mystics have seen it as profound spiritual allegory, a symbolic representation of divine order, the 4 Gospels, or the nature of angelic beings. The Merkaba became the basis for an entire school of Jewish mysticism focused on ascending through celestial realms. The traditional view is that Ezekiel was using the most advanced technological metaphors of his time, the chariot, the wheel, to convey an experience of the divine that was fundamentally indescribable. The eyes on the wheels, for instance, are interpreted as representing God's omnipresent sight. However, with the dawn of the aerospace age, a new and literal interpretation emerged. In 1968, Aerospace engineer Joseph Blumrich, tasked with debunking Erich von Daniken's claims, set out to prove Ezekiel's vision was impossible from an engineering standpoint. After a meticulous analysis, he arrived at the opposite conclusion. He argued the description was technically coherent. The wheel within a wheel could describe a type of omnidirectional landing gear. The intersecting wings could be helicopter-type rotors or propulsion units. The crystal vault could be a canopy. Blumrich even designed a feasible spacecraft based on the description, published in his book The Spaceships of Ezekiel. This lent unprecedented credibility to a literal reading. The power of Ezekiel's account lies in its layered complexity. It can be read as sublime theology, profound psychology, or as a startlingly accurate technical report. The vision is embedded with sensory detail, sound, light, motion, and even the emotional response of the prophet who falls on his face. To dismiss it entirely is to ignore its central place in religious history. To accept it purely as a UFO encounter is to strip it of its immense spiritual significance. Perhaps the truth resides in the uncomfortable space between. Ezekiel may have witnessed a phenomenal physical event of unknown origin, and his mind, a priestly mind steeped in symbolism, interpreted it through the only framework he had: the overwhelming, terrifying, and glorious presence of the divine. The vision remains a Rorschach test across the ages, revealing what we seek in the skies above us. 1440 BC, the UFO in ancient Egypt, the Tulli Papyrus. The sands of Egypt have yielded countless secrets, from the grandeur of the pyramids to the intimate details of daily life recorded on papyrus. Among these fragments of history, one document stands out for its sheer breathtaking anomaly. It is known as the Tulli Papyrus, and its text, if genuine, describes what can only be called a mass UFO sighting over ancient Thebes during the reign of the powerful pharaoh Thutmose III. This is not a myth from the Book of the Dead. It reads like an official report, a bureaucratic record of an inexplicable aerial event that left the kingdom in awe. The story of the papyrus itself is a mystery worthy of its content. It is named for Alberto Tulli, a director of the Egyptian section of the Vatican Museum, who reportedly discovered it in a Cairo antique shop in the 1930s. Unable to afford the original, he allegedly made a handwritten copy of the hieratic text. The original papyrus has never been seen again, and all translations work from Tulli's copy. This provenance issue is the primary reason for skepticism. However, the text was translated by several prominent Egyptologists, including Prince Boris de Reykjavik, who published his version in the 1950s. The lack of a physical artifact is frustrating, but the consistency of the translated account is startling. The translation describes an event in the 22nd year of Thutmose III's reign. It states that scribes, soldiers, and citizens witnessed a circle of fire approaching from the sky. It had no head, and its breath had a foul odor. It made no sound. The text says these circles of fire became numerous, shining brighter than the sun. They eventually ascended higher and headed south, causing fish and birds to fall from the sky in their wake. Pharaoh himself witnessed the event and later ordered it to be recorded in the Annals of the House of Life, a royal library and scriptorium. The language is detached, observational, and deeply concerned with the reaction of the state and the natural world. Analyzing the description removes it from the realm of pure fantasy. The objects are described as circular, luminous, capable of coordinated movement, and affecting the environment. The detail about the foul odor is peculiar and specific, not a common feature of legendary celestial portents. The reaction of the animals suggests a possible physical effect, perhaps from sound or vibration outside human hearing. This is not a description of a meteor shower, which would be linear and brief. This is an account of structured, controlled objects performing maneuvers in the atmosphere, observed by the highest authority in the land, and deemed important enough for official record. The Tulli Papyrus remains one of the most controversial pieces of alleged ancient astronaut evidence. Its lost original is a major point against it, allowing critics to dismiss it as a modern forgery or a mistranslation of a more mundane astronomical event. Yet for proponents, its very existence, even as a copy, presents a powerful case. It fits a pattern of high strangeness reported by credible witnesses across time. Whether it is a genuine 3,500-year-old UFO report or an elaborate 20th-century hoax, the Tulli Papyrus forces a conversation. It challenges us to ask what the ancient Egyptians, master observers of the sky, might have seen and felt compelled to write down for eternity. 329 BC, Alexander the Great's UFO battle intervention. The campaign of Alexander the Great is the stuff of legend, a relentless march of conquest that stretched from Greece to the borders of India. His chroniclers, writing in the centuries that followed, recorded not only his battles and strategies but also strange omens and portents that attended his journey. One of the most peculiar of these events is said to have occurred during the grueling 7-month siege of the island city of Tyre in 329 BC. According to several historical sources, Alexander's army received assistance from an unexpected and inexplicable quarter, the sky itself. The primary account comes from the historian Quintus Curtius Rufus, writing in the 1st century AD. He records that as the Macedonian forces were attempting their final, desperate assault on the formidable island fortress, the defenders were suddenly thrown into panic. The reason was the appearance of what Curtius calls a flaming shield. This object, described as circular and glowing, swooped down from the sky and flew over the city before crashing into the sea. A similar account is given by the Greek historian Diodorus Siculus, who also mentions the aerial object. The sight of this phenomenon, interpreted as a divine sign against the Tyrians, shattered their morale and allowed Alexander's troops to breach the walls soon after. Another version of the story is found in the writings of the biographer Plutarch. He tells a slightly different tale, set not at Tyre, but during Alexander's later crossing of the Jaxartes River against the Scythians. Plutarch writes that, suddenly, silver shields, hollow and emitting fire, dove from the sky at the riverbank, scattering the enemy cavalry and allowing Alexander to cross safely. The core elements remain consistent across these accounts: a martial shield-like object performing an aggressive dive-bombing maneuver that causes military panic and turns the tide of a battle. It is a narrative of direct tactical intervention. Skeptical analysis offers alternative explanations. The most common is that these stories are later propagandistic insertions meant to bolster Alexander's legend as a man favored by the gods. The flaming shield could be a misinterpretation of a meteorite or a rare atmospheric plasma phenomenon, like ball lightning, which was then woven into the historical narrative after the fact. Military historians also note that the siege of Tyre was ultimately won by Alexander's brilliant and ruthless engineering, building a massive causeway to reach the island. The UFO story, they argue, is dramatic frosting on the cake of his military genius. Yet, the specificity of the reports gives one pause. These are not vague lights in the sky. They are described as metallic, shield-shaped objects performing precise low-altitude maneuvers, with psychological and physical effects on the combatants. The fact that similar stories attached to different battles in Alexander's career could indicate either a literary trope or a series of repeated anomalous events witnessed by his army. If we consider the accounts at face value, they present a scenario where an advanced aerial technology directly influenced a pivotal moment in ancient warfare. Whether a piece of myth-making or a lost fragment of a stranger truth, the story of Alexander's celestial allies remains one of history's most intriguing military mysteries. 218 BC, the Roman UFOs' shields in the sky. The Romans were meticulous record keepers, and among their historical annals were collections of prodigies, strange and ominous events believed to signal the displeasure of the gods. These were not mere superstition. They were officially reported by priests and governors, investigated by the Senate, and often resulted in public rituals to restore the favor of the gods. Scattered throughout these dry, bureaucratic lists are accounts of aerial phenomena that sound uncannily like modern UFO reports. They reveal that the skies over the Roman Republic were far from quiet. One of the earliest and most famous comes from the historian Livy, writing about the year 218 BC. He states that in Arpi, a town in Apulia, Phantom ships had been seen gleaming in the sky. The description is brief, but evocative. The use of the word ships suggests structured, substantial craft, not formless lights. The fact that they were gleaming implies a reflective, metallic surface catching the sun. This was not a single witness account. It was an event significant enough to be recorded as an official prodigy, a disruption in the natural order that demanded state attention. Another compilation, The Book of Prodigies by Julius Obsequens, written in the 4th century AD, but drawing on earlier sources, contains a cluster of such reports. In the year 99 BC, he records that in Tarquinia, a thing like a round shield was seen flying across the sky from west to east. The shield analogy is a recurring one in ancient reports, likely the closest contemporary term for a smooth, disc-shaped object. Then in 74 BC, in the twilight sky, a spark was seen to fall from a star, increase in size as it approached the Earth, and after becoming as large as the moon, it shone as in daylight, then ascended back into the sky and transformed into a torch. This is one of the most dynamic descriptions, detailing a structured object changing altitude and luminosity. Perhaps the most dramatic account from Obsequens is from the year 105 BC. He writes that the people of Ameria and Tudor saw a celestial spectacle in the form of a round shield, which seemed to be on fire. It traversed the sky from west to east. This report adds the element of fire or intense luminescence to the shield-like object. The consistency of the descriptions across centuries is striking. Circular or shield-shaped, self-luminous, capable of silent, swift flight, and sometimes dramatic changes in trajectory. These were not comets, which were well known and tracked by Roman astronomers. These were something else entirely. The Roman mindset provides crucial context. They did not have a framework for extraterrestrial visitation. Their interpretive lens was strictly religious and political. Any unusual aerial event was a sign, a message from the gods about the state of the Republic, often preceding wars or political upheaval. The object itself was less important than its presumed meaning. This cultural filter may have preserved these reports in a surprisingly pure form. The priests recording a fiery shield were not trying to tell a science fiction story. They were dutifully noting an alarming anomaly that they believed had serious consequences for the state. In doing so, they left behind a compelling dossier of ancient aerial anomalies, frozen in the amber of bureaucratic record. 776 AD, the 776 AD UFOs that saved a French castle. As the Carolingian Empire rose under Charlemagne, its expansion was met with fierce resistance from the pagan Saxon tribes of northern Germania. The warfare was brutal, characterized by raids, sieges, and the destruction of Christian outposts. One such outpost was the Sigiburg Castle, a Frankish fort perched on a hill in what is now Syburg, Germany. According to the Royal Frankish Annals, a primary historical source for the period, the siege of Sigiburg in 776 AD was lifted not by a relieving army, but by a miraculous and terrifying intervention from the heavens. An event that reads like a medieval close encounter. The annals state that the Saxons had surrounded the fortress, intent on wiping out the Frankish garrison. The defenders were in a dire situation, cut off and outnumbered. As the Saxons prepared for their final assault, the chronicle records that the besieged Christians witnessed two large shields, reddish in color, hovering and darting about above the church inside the castle walls. The sight was not hidden. The Saxon attackers saw them too. To the Christian defenders, this was a divine sign of protection, a manifestation of God's favor. But to the pagan Saxons, the same phenomenon was interpreted as a monstrous omen of impending doom. The psychological impact was immediate and decisive. The Saxon army, gripped by a sudden collective panic, broke their siege and fled in disarray from the castle. The Frankish garrison, emboldened by what they saw as a miracle, pursued them and inflicted heavy casualties. The event was so significant that it was recorded in the official annals of the kingdom, a testament to its perceived importance in the ongoing war for souls and territory. The description is spare, but powerful. Two objects, shield-shaped, glowing with a red hue, performing aerial maneuvers over a specific location during a critical military moment. Modern analysis must tread carefully between medieval cosmology and modern phenomenology. To the 8th century mind, the world was a stage for constant spiritual warfare. Angels and demons were as real as swords and arrows. A miraculous sign in the sky was a perfectly logical event within their worldview. Skeptics therefore argue that the story is either pure religious propaganda, invented to bolster Christian morale and demonize the Saxons, or a misinterpretation of a rare atmospheric event, such as a parhelion or sundog, which can create bright, shield-like spots of light in the sky. However, the specificity of the account challenges a purely symbolic reading. The objects are described as multiple, mobile, and localized directly over the conflict zone. A stationary atmospheric halo would not account for the darting motion. Furthermore, the reaction was not one of simple awe, but of military terror that caused a seasoned army to break and run. Whether it was a documented case of psychological warfare aided by an unexplained aerial display, or a genuine anomaly that altered the course of a battle, the Sigeberg incident stands as a fascinating case study. It shows how an unidentified flying object, viewed through the lens of competing belief systems, can become a historical turning point. 1561. The Angel's Hair UFO event of 1561. The dawn of April 14th, 1561, in the free imperial city of Nuremberg, began not with the ordinary sounds of a medieval marketplace, but with cries of alarm and awe. According to a remarkable news broadsheet printed shortly after the event, the citizens witnessed a terrifying aerial battle in the sky. This was not a fleeting glimpse. It was a prolonged, chaotic spectacle involving a multitude of strange craft, culminating in a crash and a mysterious substance falling to Earth. The broadsheet, complete with a vivid woodcut illustration, is one of the most detailed and famous UFO reports from the early modern period. The text describes spheres, cylinders, and crosses engaged in a violent dogfight. The woodcut shows these objects in the sky, with some spheres appearing to stream from larger cylindrical motherships. The battle raged, according to the account, until the objects appeared to exhaust themselves. Then a large black spear-shaped object was seen, and finally all the participants vanished. But the event was not over. The broadsheet reports that after the battle, a great crash was heard as if something had struck the earth beyond the city, and a great cloud of smoke rose. Most intriguingly, it mentions that a strange filamentous substance, like fine white hair, fell from the sky and dissolved upon touch. This material is what later UFO researchers would call angel hair. The social and historical context of Nuremberg in 1561 is critical. The city was a prosperous center of trade, science, and printing. It was also a time of profound religious tension and apocalyptic fear, on the brink of the Protestant Reformation's wars. Celestial omens were taken extremely seriously as messages from God. The city council would have investigated such a public event. The fact that a printed news sheet was produced indicates it was a major civic occurrence, not a private vision. The printer, Hans Wolf Glaser, was putting his reputation on the line by publishing this account. Skeptical interpretations have focused on atmospheric and astronomical explanations. Some propose a particularly spectacular and complex parhelion, or sundog formation, where ice crystals in the atmosphere can create mock suns, crosses, and arcs of light. Others suggest a meteoroid breakup, with fragments entering the atmosphere at a shallow angle, creating the illusion of a battle. The angel hair could be explained as spider silk or other airborne gossamer, a known natural phenomenon. To a population steeped in biblical symbolism, a cross in the sky would have been loaded with meaning, potentially shaping their interpretation of other shapes they saw. Yet the sheer complexity of the description defies easy explanation. Sundogs are static and positioned relative to the sun. The Nuremberg account describes dynamic, independent motion and interaction between distinct shape spheres, cylinders, and the large black spear. The reported duration and the final crash with smoke suggest a physical, localized event. The angel hair, while having natural parallels, is a recurring element in modern UFO reports, often associated with sightings of structured craft. The Nuremberg broadsheet remains an enigma. It is either a stunning record of a mass hallucination shaped by religious anxiety, a wildly misinterpreted celestial light show, or one of history's most dramatic and well-documented displays of unexplained aerial phenomena. Its power lies in its specificity and its permanence, a snapshot of a morning when the sky over a German city became a theater of war. 1566. The 1566 Basel UFO Armada sighting. Just 5 years after the terrifying spectacle over Nuremberg, a similar, though distinct event unfolded over the Swiss city of Basel. On 2 separate occasions in the summer of 1566, according to the city's official gazette, the populace witnessed a fleet of dark spheres engaged in what appeared to be an aerial combat. Like the Nuremberg event, this was not whispered rumor. It was printed news, intended for the citizenry, and the woodcut that accompanied the story is one of the most iconic and clear images from the annals of historical ufology. The first event occurred on July 27, 1566. The Gazette reported that at sunrise many large black balls were seen moving at high speed in the air toward the sun. They made turns and swerved against each other, as if fighting. They faded after a time, and then some became red and fiery before fading away. The second event on August 7th was even more intense. The account states that many more spheres appeared, some red, some fading to black, and they raced through the air with such speed and ferocity that it seemed they would ignite and consume the entire sky. The witnesses included many credible citizens, and the phenomenon lasted for several hours. The Basel woodcut is telling. It shows a panoramic view of the city, with citizens pointing to a sky filled with black circular objects, some in front of the sun, some beside it. The sun itself is depicted with a human face, a common artistic convention of the time, but the objects are rendered as simple, distinct spheres. There is no attempt to stylize them as angels or demons. They are presented as physical objects. This visual reportage, combined with the textual description of their motion turning, swerving, fighting, suggests intelligent control, not the passive drift of balloons or the predictable path of astronomical bodies. What could explain such a sight? The most common natural hypothesis is again a parhelion or complex atmospheric optics. However, experienced observers in a city like Basel, used to the alpine skies, would likely have recognized common sundogs. The report emphasizes the objects were black spheres that moved at high speed and interacted with each other, which does not match the behavior of refracted light patches. Another theory involves large flocks of birds seen silhouetted against the rising sun. Starlings or other birds in massive murmurations can create stunning fluid shapes, yet the description of the objects becoming red and fiery and the prolonged, hours-long duration pushes against a purely avian explanation. The Basel event, paired with Nuremberg, suggests a pattern of mass sightings of spherical objects in Central Europe during the mid-16th century. This was an era of immense social and religious upheaval. The Little Ice Age was affecting climate, and people were primed to see signs and portents. Yet the consistency of the reports across 2 different cities, documented by the nascent print media, demands attention. The people of Basel were not describing a vague light. They described a specific repeated phenomenon of multiple dark maneuvering spheres. Whether it was a rare and spectacular natural event beyond their understanding or something else entirely, the Basel UFO Armada remains a cornerstone case, proving that the phenomenon of mass-witnessed structured aerial anomalies has deep roots in recorded history. 1500s, UFOs in Renaissance art, the Madonna and UFO. The Renaissance was a rebirth of art, science, and humanism, a time when painters sought to depict the divine with unprecedented realism and emotional power. To achieve this, they filled their biblical scenes with carefully observed details from the contemporary world Italian landscapes, Florentine fashions, and familiar architecture. Yet in several notable works from this period, artists included something far less familiar in their heavenly skies. These are not the ethereal clouds and angelic hosts of earlier Gothic art, but defined, solid, often metallic-looking objects that gleam with their own light, casting beams down upon the sacred scenes below. The most famous example is the Madonna with Saint Giovannino, housed in the Palazzo Vecchio in Florence, and often attributed to the workshop of Domenico Ghirlandaio. In the upper right of the painting, behind the Virgin Mary's shoulder, is a distinct disc-shaped object hovering in the sky. It is painted with careful chiaroscuro, giving it a three-dimensional solid appearance. A man and his dog in the background are clearly looking up at it. The man has his hand raised to shield his eyes, a gesture of observation. The object emits rays of light downward, not upward like a star. This is not a smudge or a stylistic cloud. It is a deliberate, detailed inclusion. Another compelling work is the Annunciation with Saint Amidius by Carlo Crivelli, painted in 1486. Above the scene where the angel Gabriel visits Mary, a distinct cylindrical beam of light, dotted with golden specks, pierces through the architecture of the building and strikes Mary's head. While this could be interpreted as the Holy Spirit, the beam's form is highly geometric and mechanistic. It originates from a small circular cloud in an otherwise clear sky, a cloud that resembles a lenticular formation or a distinct object. The precision of the beam is striking, unlike the diffuse golden light typically used to represent divine radiance. In the Crucifixion, a fresco painted atop the Visoki Dekani monastery in Kosovo around 1350, two small craft-like objects with pilots inside are depicted flying in the sky on either side of the cross. The pilots appear to be looking over their shoulders, operating controls. While this is a medieval rather than a Renaissance work, it exemplifies the same tendency. These objects are not symbolic angels. They are vehicles. Art historians traditionally classify such objects as symbolic representations of the sun and moon, or as mystical wheels within the divine cosmology. The man in the Ghirlandaio painting, they argue, is simply shading his eyes from God's glory. However, the argument for symbolism versus representation is not clear-cut. Renaissance artists were masters of allegory, but they were also keen observers of the natural world. They painted specific breeds of dogs, identifiable plants, and accurate landscapes. When they painted an object that looks like a metallic disc casting a searchlight beam, complete with a human witness reacting to it, it is worth asking what visual reference they might have been using. Could they have been depicting a common symbolic motif in an unusually realistic style? Absolutely. But could they also have been incorporating into their sacred art something wondrous and inexplicable they or their patrons had witnessed in the actual sky? The paintings do not give us answers, but they pose a fascinating question. They freeze a moment of potential observation within the frame of devotion, inviting us to wonder what inspired the artist's hand as he mixed his blues and golds to paint the heavens. 1917. The Fatima Miracle of 1917 mass UFO sighting on October 13, 1917, in a field near Fatima, Portugal. A crowd of approximately 70,000 people, ranging from devout peasants to skeptical journalists, gathered for a prophesied miracle. 3 shepherd children, Lucia dos Santos and her cousins Francisco and Jacinta Mato, had reported months of visitations from a luminous lady who they believed was the Virgin Mary. The lady had promised a public sign on that day. What transpired has become one of the most documented and debated mass events in modern history. Witnesses reported that the sun seemed to detach from the sky, spin, and plunge toward the earth in a dazzling, multicolored display. But was this a divine miracle, a mass psychological event, or something else entirely? The event, known as the Miracle of the Sun, was described in detail by countless witnesses. After a period of rain, the clouds parted. The sun appeared as a dull, silvery disk that could be looked at directly without pain. Then it began to tremble and spin, throwing off beams of colored light in all directions. It performed a zigzag dance in the sky, and most terrifyingly, it seemed to plunge toward the crowd before returning to its place. The ground and the people's soaked clothing were reported to have been dried instantaneously. Reports came from miles away, beyond the immediate crowd. Not everyone saw the same thing. Some saw only the colored lights, others the sun's motion, but the scale of the witness pool is undeniable. From a theological perspective, this is the cornerstone of the Fatima apparitions, leading to the site becoming a major Catholic pilgrimage center. The church, after a lengthy investigation, deemed it a supernatural event worthy of belief. The children's earlier prophecies, including a vision of hell and a prediction of World War II, added layers of profound religious significance. For believers, it is a clear and powerful sign of divine intervention in human affairs, a warning and a call to prayer. The event is framed entirely within a Catholic worldview of prophecy, miracle, and repentance. Skeptical and scientific analyses have proposed various explanations. The most prominent is that of a mass hallucination or psychosomatic event triggered by religious expectation, prolonged staring at the sun, and collective suggestion. The drying effect could be explained by the sudden break in the clouds and strong winds. Others have suggested atmospheric phenomena, such as a rare form of parhelion caused by ice crystals, or even a sundog, which can create the illusion of multiple suns and colored lights. Some researchers have pointed to the possibility of a plasma phenomenon, a ball of ionized air that can exhibit strange motions and luminosity. The ufological interpretation, first seriously proposed by authors like Jacques Vallée, takes a different tack. It does not seek to debunk the witness's experience, but to recontextualize it. Could the children have been interacting with a non-human intelligence that used a form acceptable to their culture? Could the luminous lady and the subsequent solar phenomenon be two aspects of the same advanced technology, capable of projecting images and affecting local environmental conditions, including light and atmospheric moisture? The event shares hallmarks of modern UFO close encounters: an isolated rural location, repeated contact with child witnesses, a predicted public display, and physical effects on the environment and observers. Fatima stands at a powerful crossroads of faith, psychology, and phenomenology. It is perhaps the ultimate example of how an unidentified aerial phenomenon is interpreted through the dominant cultural lens. In 1917 Portugal, that lens was fervent Catholicism. The event provided exactly what that worldview expected, a sign from heaven. But stripping away the interpretation, we are left with the raw testimony of tens of thousands. Something extraordinary happened in the sky above Fatima that day. It changed the course of lives and history. Whether it was a miracle, a mystery of the mind, or a contact event, the miracle of the sun remains one of the most potent and puzzling mass sightings ever recorded. 800 BC to 300 AD, ancient Indian Vimanas, flying chariots, or UFOs, the ancient Sanskrit epics of India, the Mahabharata and the Ramayana, are not merely spiritual texts or tales of heroic adventure. They are sprawling narratives that contain incredibly detailed descriptions of advanced technology, particularly aerial vehicles known as Vimanas. These are not vague, magical chariots pulled by winged horses. They are described with mechanical specificity, including their construction materials, propulsion systems, weapon capabilities, and even piloting instructions. To the modern reader, these passages sound less like mythology and more like technical manuals for a technology we are only now beginning to comprehend. The most famous Vimana is the Pushpaka, the flying palace of the demon king Ravana, later commandeered by the hero Rama. The Ramayana describes it as a large, shining vehicle that could fly at the will of its occupant, producing a melodious sound. It could accommodate an entire palace, yet it was capable of immense speed and altitude. Other texts, like the Vaimanika Shastra, a later work purportedly based on ancient sources, delve into astonishing detail. They speak of Vimanas constructed from specific light metals, powered by mercury vortex engines or other energy sources referred to as liquid fire. The descriptions include diagrams of seemingly aerodynamic structures with domes, portholes, and exhaust vents. The weaponry associated with these vehicles is perhaps the most startling aspect. The Mahabharata describes battles involving these flying machines and the terrible weapons they deployed. One such weapon is the Brahmastra, said to be capable of destroying entire regions, leaving the land barren and sterile for generations, with effects chillingly reminiscent of radioactive fallout. Another passage describes a projectile charged with the power of the universe, a blazing shaft of light that reduced entire armies to ashes. The text speaks of the corpses being so burned as to be unrecognizable, and survivors losing their hair and nails, symptoms consistent with acute radiation poisoning. Mainstream scholarship interprets these passages as profound allegory or poetic exaggeration. The Vimanas are seen as symbolic vehicles for the gods, representing spiritual ascension or the power of the mind. The devastating weapons are metaphors for the destructive potential of human ambition and wrath. The ancient Indian literary tradition was rich in metaphor, and these epic stories served to convey philosophical truths and moral lessons, not historical fact. The technical details, skeptics argue, are later additions or misinterpretations by translators with a modern technological bias. However, the sheer consistency and volume of these descriptions across multiple ancient texts pose a significant challenge to the purely allegorical view. The details of construction, aerial maneuverability, and the specific physical effects of the weapons are narrated with a matter-of-fact tone that stands apart from the surrounding poetic metaphor. If these stories are the imaginative creation of a Bronze Age culture, where did the inspiration for such precise, anachronistic concepts originate? The Vimana accounts force us to consider a difficult possibility. Could they be the cultural memory of a lost advanced civilization, or, as some theorists suggest, the recorded interaction with a visiting technology so advanced it could only be described in the language of magic and gods? The answer remains hidden in the cryptic verses of a timeless epic. 2000 BC, the Mohenjo-Daro ancient nuclear blast theory. The Indus Valley civilization was one of the world's earliest urban societies, contemporary with ancient Egypt and Mesopotamia. Its great city, Mohenjo-Daro, located in modern-day Pakistan, showcases remarkable urban planning, advanced drainage, and a stable, prosperous culture. Yet, its eventual decline remains a historical mystery. A fringe but persistent theory, proposed by researchers like David Davenport, suggests a cataclysmic and terrifying end for parts of the city, one that seems to echo the descriptions of epic warfare found in the ancient Indian texts. This is the controversial theory of an ancient nuclear explosion. The evidence presented is both physical and textual. At Mohenjo-Daro, archaeologists found areas where bricks of buildings appeared to have been vitrified, that is, fused together by extreme heat. Normally, such vitrification requires temperatures in excess of 1500 degrees Celsius, far beyond the capability of any ordinary fire. Furthermore, skeletal remains were found scattered in the streets, some holding hands, as if struck by a sudden overwhelming disaster. A few skeletons showed unusually high levels of radiation, according to some contested reports. This physical evidence, while debated, forms one pillar of the theory. The second pillar comes from the ancient text we just discussed, the Mahabharata. Specific passages describe the use of a weapon called the Agneya, which could not be countered. The description says it was a single projectile charged with all the power of the universe. An incandescent column of smoke and flame as bright as 10,000 suns rose in all its splendor. It was an unknown weapon, an iron thunderbolt, a gigantic messenger of death which reduced to ashes the entire race of the Vrishnis and the Antakas. The corpses were so burned as to be unrecognizable. Hair and nails fell out, pottery broke without apparent cause, and the birds turned white. After a few hours, all foodstuffs were infected. This account is a cornerstone of the ancient nuclear war hypothesis. The scientific and archaeological establishment overwhelmingly rejects this theory. The vitrified material is explained as the result of a massive, concentrated fire, perhaps from an invasion that used burning oil or resin. The skeletons are attributed to a massacre or a natural disaster like a flood. The radiation readings are widely disputed and have not been reliably verified by mainstream institutions. The textual descriptions from the Mahabharata, they argue, are clearly mythological and cannot be used as a historical source for a specific archaeological site separated by centuries and geography. Yet the theory persists because it creates a haunting synergy between an unresolved archaeological puzzle and some of the most bizarre and specific passages in world mythology. It connects the dots between a city with signs of sudden, intense thermal damage and ancient stories describing weapons of unimaginable heat and fallout. Whether one accepts the nuclear hypothesis or not, Mohenjo-Daro stands as a symbol of a lost past. It represents the sobering idea that our understanding of ancient history is incomplete, and that perhaps some civilizations met ends so strange and sudden that their true cause has been lost to time, surviving only as legend and as enigmatic scars upon the earth. 1803. Japanese UFO scrolls. The Utsuro incident. In the early spring of 1803, along the coast of Hitachi province in Japan, fishermen made an extraordinary discovery. According to numerous historical documents and illustrated scrolls, a strange vessel washed ashore. It was not a conventional boat. It was described as a hollow ship, a Utsuro bune, shaped like a rice cooking pot or a wooden incense burner. It was approximately 3.5 meters high and 5.5 meters wide, with windows made of crystal or glass and sealed with tree resin. The lower part was reinforced with metal bands, and strange, unreadable writing was inscribed on its interior. The most baffling part of the story concerns the vessel's sole occupant. When local fishermen pried open the hatch, they found a beautiful young woman, estimated to be around 18 or 20 years old. She was dressed in unfamiliar, finely made clothing of a foreign style. Her facial features were distinct from Japanese women, and her hair was red, a highly unusual color. She clutched a small square box to her chest, which she would not allow anyone to touch. She could not, or would not, communicate with the villagers in any known language. The contents of her box and the purpose of her journey remained a complete mystery. The local authorities were consulted. Some of the old texts, like the Toen Shosetsu published in 1825, record a fascinating local legend that provided a potential context. The legend spoke of a foreign princess from a faraway land who was sent out to sea in a boat as punishment for an illicit love affair. Interpreting the event through this lens, the villagers concluded that the woman in the Utsuro bune might be such a princess. Deeming it improper and potentially dangerous to interfere, they made the collective decision to push the strange vessel, with the woman still inside, back out to sea, where it drifted away, never to be seen again. From a folkloric perspective, the story fits neatly into a category of tales about otherworldly visitors or princesses from the sea, common in many coastal cultures. The Utsuro bune itself bears a resemblance to a traditional koto, a Japanese harp, and the entire narrative can be read as a moral parable about foreignness, taboo, and the boundaries of community. Historians generally treat it as an engaging piece of Edo period folklore, a story that blended local superstition with curiosity about the outside world during Japan's period of national isolation. Yet the mechanical details in the descriptions give one pause. The specific mention of metal reinforcement, crystal windows, and sealed hatches suggests a constructed vehicle, not a ceremonial raft. The unreadable writing implies a foreign, possibly non-human script. The woman's appearance, while humanoid, is marked as distinctly other. Could this be a highly stylized account of a genuine encounter with a derelict craft of unknown origin? The story of the Utsuro bune occupies a unique space. It is a documented piece of Japanese historical folklore that, when stripped of its cultural framing, presents a classic close encounter narrative, a craft of unknown design, an occupant who cannot integrate, and a human response of fear and rejection. It is a haunting echo from a secluded shore. The Hopi sky gods and the Kachina connection. In the high desert mesas of the American Southwest, the Hopi tribe has preserved an oral tradition that speaks not of gods in a distant heaven, but of tangible beings who came from the stars and interacted directly with their ancestors. These are the Kachinas, often represented by the famous carved dolls, but understood by the Hopi as powerful spirit beings. However, within their complex cosmology lies a more specific and startling narrative. The Hopi speak of a time when their people lived underground in a subterranean world and were guided to the surface by celestial helpers. These helpers arrived in flying shields, and from them the Hopi received laws, agricultural knowledge, and their sacred ceremonies. The Hopi origin story is profoundly different from traditional creation myths. They describe emerging from the earth through a hole called the Sipapu, led by a being called Masor, the caretaker of the earth. But other beings from the stars played a crucial role. They are said to have traveled in patuvotas, or flying shields, which could soar through the air and were capable of great speed. These sky beings are not vague deities. They are described as teachers and guides who lived among the Hopi for a time, imparting wisdom before returning to their celestial homes. The Kachina dances performed today are not merely for entertainment, but are solemn rituals to honor these beings and invite their spiritual presence back to the villages. One of the most compelling aspects of Hopi prophecy is the story of the blue star Kachina, or Sakwasahu. The prophecy states that when the blue star Kachina makes its appearance in the heavens, it will signal the beginning of the Great Purification, a period of earthly upheaval. This event is said to precede the return of the true White Brother, a figure of great wisdom. Some interpreters have linked this prophecy to the appearance of a large blue-hued celestial object, perhaps a comet or an unusual planet. The precision of this prophetic detail, passed down through uncounted generations, is striking. Anthropologists explain the Kachina tradition as a sophisticated religious and social system. The Kachinas represent the forces of nature, ancestral spirits, and concepts of morality. The flying shields are seen as symbolic representations of the sun or mythological vehicles. The stories of emerging from the earth are common among Pueblo peoples and are interpreted as migration narratives, with the Sipapu representing the place of tribal emergence in the Grand Canyon. The prophecies are understood as cyclical metaphors for social and environmental change, not literal predictions of astronomical events. Yet, from a perspective open to the ancient astronaut hypothesis, the Hopi tradition is a stunningly clear example of a contact narrative. It contains all the key elements of people in need of guidance: physical vehicles for travel, the transfer of practical knowledge, and the eventual departure of the benefactors with a promise of return. The descriptions are matter-of-fact and integrated into the practical and spiritual life of the tribe. The Hopi do not see their stories as mythology about a distant past, but as a true history that informs their present and future. In their steadfast guardianship of this knowledge, they offer a profoundly different answer to the question of our ancient past, one written not in stone or papyrus, but in the living memory of a people who still watch the skies from their desert mesas. 1897. The 1897 Texas Airship Mystery. More than half a decade before the Wright brothers' first flight at Kitty Hawk, a wave of sightings swept across the United States, centered on a mysterious powered airship. The spring of 1897, particularly in the Midwest and Texas, became a season of wonder and anxiety, as thousands of people reported seeing a slow-moving, lighted craft navigating the night sky. This was not a silent, disc-shaped object, but something that fit the technological imagination of the late Victorian era, a dirigible-like vessel, complete with propellers, searchlights, and sometimes even the voices of its crew. The mystery culminated in one of the most famous early crash stories in American folklore, the Aurora, Texas incident. Reports began in California in late 1896 and migrated eastward. Witnesses from Nebraska to Michigan described a cigar-shaped craft with wings or propellers illuminated by bright lights. Some claimed to have spoken with its pilots, who were described as ordinary, sometimes tired-looking men, who spoke of inventing the ship in secret. In Chicago, a man named Alexander Hamilton claimed an airship lassoed one of his calves and carried it off. The newspapers of the day, hungry for a sensational story, printed these accounts with varying degrees of skepticism and embellishment, creating a feedback loop of excitement and imitation. The climax of the wave was a story published in the Dallas Morning News on April 17, 1897. It reported that several days prior, the mysterious airship had crashed into a windmill on the property of a Judge Proctor in the small town of Aurora, north of Fort Worth. The pilot, described as not of this world, was killed in the crash. The report stated the wreckage contained hieroglyphic-like writing, and the pilot was given a Christian burial in the local cemetery. The story further claimed that the airship's wreckage was dumped into a nearby well. This single article transformed the airship wave from a series of sightings into a tale of physical evidence and extraterrestrial death. The conventional explanation for the entire 1897 wave is a mixture of media-driven mass hysteria and outright hoax. The Aurora story is widely considered a fabrication, possibly invented by a local stringer to put the dying town on the map after a series of setbacks. No physical evidence from the crash, the wreckage, the hieroglyphics, the well contents has ever been verified. Sightings of the airship itself are attributed to misidentified stars and planets, early experimental balloons, or simply the power of suggestion. In an era without radio or television, a thrilling story in the newspaper could easily seed imaginations and generate copycat reports. Yet, the sheer scale and consistency of the pre-Aurora sightings remain puzzling. While many reports were surely hoaxes, a core of them came from credible witnesses like sheriffs and businessmen who described a structured, powered craft performing maneuvers impossible for any known balloon of the time. The Aurora crash story may be a hoax grafted onto a genuine mystery. The 1897 airship wave stands as a fascinating historical case study. It demonstrates how an unexplained aerial phenomenon is interpreted through the lens of contemporary technology, and how the human response, a blend of awe, fear, tall tales, and journalistic exploitation, has changed very little from the age of newspapers to the age of the Internet. It is the prologue to the modern American UFO era. 1909. The Great UFO Wave of 1909. Phantom airships. Just over a decade after the Texas airship scare, a new and more global wave of sightings erupted. Beginning in the United Kingdom in the spring of 1909, reports of silent, dark airships with powerful searchlights spread to New England in the United States, and then as far as New Zealand. This wave was characterized by a higher degree of witness credibility and more aggressive behavior from the objects. Police officers, mayors, and naval officers filed reports, and the crafts were often described as maneuvering with purpose, sometimes shining lights on specific locations as if on a reconnaissance mission. In the United Kingdom, the wave began in March. A police constable in Peterborough reported a dark torpedo-shaped object with a light at each end moving against the wind. Over the next months, hundreds of reports flooded in from Wales to Scotland. Witnesses spoke of a silent craft with a searchlight probing the ground. In one case, a man claimed the airship landed and its pilot, speaking with a foreign accent, asked for directions before taking off again. The British press, amid pre-World War I tensions with Germany, fueled speculation that it was a secret German Zeppelin conducting espionage, despite the fact that Germany's early Zeppelins were neither silent nor capable of such extended, covert flights. The phenomenon crossed the Atlantic. In December 1909, New England was gripped by its own airship scare. In Worcester, Massachusetts, hundreds of people, including the city's mayor, watched a bright light maneuver silently in the night sky. In Burlington, Vermont, a police officer gave chase to a low-flying airship he described as being as long as a railroad car. Similar to the British reports, witnesses described a dark hull with a brilliant searchlight. The idea of a secret inventor was popular, but no one came forward, and no technology known at the time could account for the silent, sustained, and agile flights reported by so many. In New Zealand, in July and August of that same year, the Southern Hemisphere experienced its own wave. Residents of cities like Christchurch and Invercargill reported a bright, star-like light that moved with speed and precision, sometimes appearing to drop smaller lights. These reports were often investigated by local newspapers and remained unexplained. The global nature of the sightings, separated by vast oceans, rules out a single hoax or a localized mass hallucination. It points either to a worldwide psychological event or to the presence of a physical phenomenon observed independently on different continents. The 1909 wave is significant because it marks a transition. The objects were still described as airships, fitting the technological template of the day, but their performance, silent, agile, and enduring, far exceeded the capabilities of any human-built craft, including the secret German projects that were the subject of much speculation. The witness pool included numerous law enforcement and civic officials, lending an air of sober credibility missing from some of the more fanciful 1897 accounts. This wave suggests that whatever the phenomenon was, it was not a one-time event, but a recurring presence that adapted its perceived form to human expectation, while displaying capabilities that consistently remained one step ahead of our own technology. 1665. The 1665 UFO battle over Stralsund, Germany. On a calm day in April 1665, the fishermen working the Baltic Sea near the strategic port city of Stralsund witnessed an event so bizarre and terrifying that it was documented in a formal scientific journal of the era. The fishermen reported being attacked by squadrons of strange aerial craft. This was not a single light in the sky, but a full-scale aerial engagement involving multiple types of vehicles. The account was published in the annual publication Relationes Historicae, a respected chronicle of notable events, complete with a detailed engraving that depicted the scene. It is one of the most vivid records of a mass-witnessed UFO dogfight from the pre-industrial age. The fishermen stated that their boats were approached by a multitude of ships in the air. The engraving shows distinct types of craft. Some are spherical, like large balls. Others are shaped like naval warships, complete with rows of cannons, and still others resemble flat plates or discs. These aerial vessels were engaged in a fierce battle with one another, swooping and diving over the water. The fishermen reported that the engagement was so intense and frightening that they feared for their lives, believing the conflict would spill over and destroy their vessels. After a period of combat, the objects reportedly vanished as suddenly as they had appeared. The historical context is crucial. Stralsund was a major Hanseatic port, and the Baltic Sea was a contested region in the mid-17th century, still feeling the effects of the 30 Years' War. The idea of naval warfare was therefore at the forefront of the witnesses' minds. The journal's editor, seeking a rational explanation within the natural philosophy of the time, proposed that the sighting was a rare atmospheric mirage, a fata morgana, that had distorted the images of real naval ships from over the horizon and projected them into the sky. This is one of the earliest attempts to apply a scientific, albeit incorrect, explanation to a UFO report. The mirage theory, however, faces significant challenges when applied to this specific case. Fata Morgana mirages typically show inverted, static, or gently wavering images of distant objects. They do not create dynamic, interactive battles between multiple distinct ship types that maneuver independently and engage in combat. The fisherman's report describes action, not a static picture. Furthermore, the engraving, based on their testimony, shows clear, separate craft-type spheres, warships, plates, not a single distorted image. If this was a mirage, it was of an unparalleled complexity and dynamism. The Stralsund battle remains an enigma wrapped in the scientific language of the 17th century. It demonstrates that the phenomenon could manifest not as a solitary wonder, but as a complex, theatrical display involving multiple interacting objects. The official attempt to explain it away as a mirage shows an early impulse to force the unexplained into the accepted scientific paradigm, a pattern that continues to this day. Whether it was a spectacular collective hallucination, an unprecedented atmospheric puzzle, or something else, the event over the Baltic in 1665 proves that the sky has been a theater of mystery for far longer than our modern era of jets and rockets. 1944-45 Foo Fighters, War Two pilot UFO encounters. As the air war over Europe and the Pacific reached its climax, a new and baffling enemy appeared in the skies, one that ignored nationality and posed a threat not through aggression, but through unnerving, impossible proximity. Allied and Axis pilots began reporting small, glowing balls of light that would form on their wingtips or tail them for miles. These objects were dubbed Foo Fighters, a term borrowed from a popular comic strip of the time, Smokey Stover, which used the nonsense phrase "where there's foo, there's fire." But for the pilots encountering them, there was nothing comical about these silent, intelligent-seeming companions. The reports were remarkably consistent across different theaters of war. The objects were described as metallic or fiery spheres, sometimes in formations, sometimes solitary. They could keep perfect formation with aircraft traveling at hundreds of miles per hour, performing instantaneous turns and accelerations that defied the laws of inertia. Most chillingly, they exhibited what appeared to be intelligent curiosity or surveillance. They would pace bombers on their runs over Germany, dart around fighter planes, and then vanish at will. Crucially, they were never seen to launch an attack. Their presence was psychological warfare of the most unnerving kind, causing pilots to question their sanity and fear a new secret weapon. The most famous unit to document these encounters was the U.S. Army Air Force's 415th Night Fighter Squadron operating in Europe. Pilots like Lieutenant Edward Schluter and Lieutenant Donald Myers filed detailed reports after being followed by clusters of glowing red and white balls. The intelligence officers who debriefed them took the sightings seriously, initially suspecting a German psychological weapon using flares or remote-controlled devices. Investigations after the war confirmed that German and Japanese pilots had seen identical objects, which they also suspected were Allied secret weapons. This mutual confusion ruled out any known terrestrial technology from any nation. The official post-war investigation by projects like Sign and Grudge concluded that Foo Fighters were likely St. Elmo's fire, a static electrical discharge, or autokinesis, a visual illusion where a stationary light appears to move against a dark sky. However, veteran pilots who had seen both St. Elmo's fire and Foo Fighters vehemently rejected this explanation. St. Elmo's fire is a crackling, diffuse plasma that plays along an aircraft's surface. It does not form into separate, hard spheres that perform coordinated, intelligent maneuvers outside the cockpit window. The pilots knew what they were seeing was different, and their trained observational skills gave their testimony immense weight. The Foo Fighter phenomenon is a critical historical pivot point. It marks the moment when the UFO enigma entered the modern technological age, witnessed by the most highly trained observers of their time, military aviators. It demonstrated the phenomenon's complete disregard for human conflict and its apparent interest in our advancing machinery of war. These encounters stripped away the mythological and religious interpretations of the past. Here was the phenomenon, cold and luminous, pacing a B-17 flying fortress over the Ruhr Valley. It was no longer a sign from the gods or a fairy tale. It was an operational reality, a mystery that would follow humanity out of the war and into the atomic age, setting the stage for the flying saucer era that was just over the horizon. 1942, the 1942 Battle of LA. In the early, terrified hours of February 25, 1942, less than 3 months after the attack on Pearl Harbor, the United States West Coast believed it was under a second Japanese assault. Air raid sirens wailed across Los Angeles and a total blackout plunged the city into darkness. Then, the searchlights of the 37th Coast Artillery Brigade converged on a single, slow-moving object hovering over the city. What followed was one of the most extraordinary military engagements in American history, as over 1,400 rounds of anti-aircraft artillery were fired at a solitary, unidentified target for nearly an hour. The next day's front page of the Los Angeles Times bore the iconic headline, "Army says alarm real." The object, described by thousands of witnesses including the Secretary of the Navy, was a large, luminous, and slow-moving craft. It drifted from over Santa Monica inland toward Long Beach, seemingly unfazed by the incredible volume of explosive shells bursting around it. Witness reports varied. Some saw a single, large, elliptical object caught in the searchlight beams, while others reported multiple smaller objects. The anti-aircraft fire was so intense that falling shrapnel damaged buildings and cars, and several civilians died from heart attacks or in traffic accidents during the panic. Yet despite the massive barrage, the object was never hit, and no wreckage was ever recovered. Initial statements from the military were contradictory. The Secretary of the Navy, Frank Knox, called the incident a false alarm due to war nerves. This explanation was immediately rejected by the Army, which had commanded the artillery batteries. The Western Defense Command stated unequivocally that unidentified aircraft had been over the city. Within days, under intense pressure, the War Department settled on a final explanation. The entire incident had been triggered by stray weather balloons and a case of war jitters that led to misplaced anti-aircraft fire. This explanation satisfied almost no one, least of all the gunners who had tracked the object and the citizens who had seen it. The Battle of Los Angeles stands as a monumental case for several reasons. First, it is one of the most heavily documented mass sightings in history, with photographs, newsreels, and thousands of civilian and military witnesses. Second, it demonstrates a clear military response to an unidentified incursion during a time of war, proving the object was considered a real threat. Third, the official explanation is widely regarded as implausible. A slow-moving weather balloon would have been obliterated by the first few shells. It could not have survived a sustained, hour-long barrage from the entire city's air defenses. The object's resilience remains its most puzzling feature. This event is a stark prelude to the modern UFO era. It shows a powerful, structured craft operating with impunity in American airspace at a time of maximum national alert. It resulted in a massive, futile military response and a swift, unsatisfactory cover story. The Battle of LA is often overshadowed by the Roswell incident 5 years later, but in many ways it is more significant. It was a public, violent confrontation with the unknown, witnessed by a metropolis, and it left a permanent question mark in the official history of World War II on the American home front. It proved that the phenomenon was not just lights in the sky, but something that could command the fire of a nation's entire defense. Not a modern mystery, the enduring evidence of ancient UFOs. We have traveled from the deep-time dreams of prehistoric cave artists to the radar-scrambled skies of the Second World War. We have stood with Roman historians recording fiery shields, with medieval monks sketching celestial battles, and with Chinese scientists meticulously documenting a persistent, luminous pearl over a lake. 25 points of light scattered across the map of human history. Each one, on its own, is a curious anomaly, a story that could be explained away as myth, misperception, or metaphor. But together, they form a constellation, and the shape they trace is undeniable. The real mystery is not in any single artifact or text, it is in the chilling repetition. A pharaoh in 1440 BC describes circles of fire with no head and a foul odor. A Roman proconsul in 74 BC writes of a flaming shield darting across the twilight. Saxon warriors in 776 AD flee in terror from two glowing red shields over a castle. The citizens of Nuremberg in 1561 witness spheres and cylinders engaged in an aerial duel. The descriptions are separated by continents and millennia, yet they speak the same cryptic language. The technology morphs, from shields to ships to spheres, but the core behavior of these phenomena, their luminosity, their silent maneuverability, their defiance of the known laws of the contemporary world, remains a constant. This consistency forces a profound and unsettling question. What are we to make of this uninterrupted testimony? The easy answer is to dismiss each witness through the lens of their time. The ancient Egyptian was superstitious, the Roman was recording omens, the medieval monk was seeing signs from God. But this dismisses the very human experience at the heart of each account. These were often practical people, soldiers, sailors, scholars, farmers, reporting a concrete event that violated their understanding of reality. They reached for the best vocabulary they had: shields, ships, chariots, pearls. What vocabulary would we use if we saw them today? This documentary has not been an argument for a specific origin, not for aliens, nor gods, nor secret human technology. It has been an argument for the phenomenon itself. The evidence establishes, beyond reasonable doubt, that humanity has been observing and recording advanced unidentified aerial phenomena for thousands of years. This is a historical fact. The U in UFO has always been with us. The I, the identification, is what has always been missing. Therefore, the modern UFO era is not an invention of the Cold War. It is merely the latest chapter in a very old book. Roswell, Phoenix Lights, and Navy pilot encounters are not the beginning of the story. They are the continuation of a narrative written in the annals of every major civilization that has ever looked up and wondered. We are not suddenly being visited. We have, it seems, always been in someone's or something's field of view. So as we look to the future, with our satellites and telescopes searching for signs of intelligence in the cosmos, we would be wise to also look behind us. The greatest clue to the mystery in our skies may not be ahead, but buried in our past. The witnesses have spoken from across the ages. They have pointed upward, and they have left their records. The question is no longer whether they saw something. The stone, the parchment, and the printed page confirm that they did. The only question left is the one that connects their time to ours. What, in the name of all that is uncharted, was it? If you made it this far, thanks for watching, and make sure to smash both the like and hype buttons and subscribe to our channel for more ominous history videos. We greatly appreciate your support. See you in the next video.